Brother Brad Ricks will be exhorting us this morning, and his subject is called Seeking the Sun. And in preparation for his remarks, he's asked that we read from the Book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 1, the entire chapter, and then we're going to go all the way through verse 20 of chapter 2. Ecclesiastes chapter 1. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What profit hath a man of all his labor which he taketh under the sun? One generation passeth away, and another generation cometh. But the earth abideth forever. The sun also riseth, and the sun goeth down, and hasteth to his place where he arose. The wind goeth toward the south, and turneth about unto the north. It whirleth about continually, and the wind returneth again to his circuits. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full unto the place from whence the rivers come. Thither they return again. All things are full of labor. Men cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. The thing that hath been, it is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done. And there is no new thing under the sun. Is there anything whereof it may be said, see, this is new, it hath been already of old time, which was before us? There is no remembrance of former things, neither shall there be any remembrance of things that are to come with those that shall come after. I, the preacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem, and I gave my heart to seek and search out by wisdom concerning all things that are done under heaven. This sore travail hath God given to the sons of man to be exercised therewith. I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and vexation of spirit. That which is crooked cannot be made straight, and that which is wanting cannot be numbered. I communed with mine own heart, saying, Lo, I am come to great estate, and have gotten more wisdom than all they that have been before me in Jerusalem. Yea, my heart had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I gave my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceived that this also is vexation of spirit. For much wisdom is much grief, and he that increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow. Chapter 2, verses 1 through 20. I said, in mine heart, go now, I will prove thee with mirth. Therefore enjoy pleasure, and behold, this also is vanity. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of mirth, what doeth it? I sought in mine heart to give myself unto wine, yet acquainting mine heart with wisdom, and to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was that good for the sons of man, which they should do under heaven all the days of their life. I made me great works. I builded me houses. I planted me vineyards. I made me gardens and orchards, and planted trees in them of all kinds of fruits. I made me pools of water, to water therewith the wood that bringeth forth trees. I got me servants and maidens, and had servants born in mine house. Also I had great possessions of great and small cattle above all that were in Jerusalem before me. I gathered me also silver and gold, and the peculiar treasure of kings and of provinces. I gat me men singers and women singers, and the delights of the sons of men as musical instruments, and that of all sorts. So I was great, and increased more than all that were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me, and whatever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them. I withheld not my heart from any joy, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my portion of all my labor. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought, and the labor that I had labored to do, and behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun. And I turned myself to behold wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do that cometh after the king, even that which hath been already done? Then I saw that wisdom excelleth folly, as far as light excelleth darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walketh in darkness. And I myself perceived also that one event happeneth to them all. Then I said in my heart, as it happeneth to the fool, so it happeneth even to me. And why was I then more wise? Then I said in my heart that this also is vanity, for there is no remembrance of the wise man more than of the fool forever, seeing that which now is in the days to come shall all be forgotten. And how dieth the wise man? As the fool. Therefore I hated life, because the work that is wrought under the sun is grievous unto me, for all is vanity and vexation of spirit. Yea, I hated all my labor which I had taken under the sun, because I should leave it unto the man that shall be after me. And who knoweth whether he shall be a wise man or a fool? Yet shall he have rule over all my labor wherein I have labored, and wherein I have showed myself wise under the sun. This is also vanity. Therefore I went about to cause my heart to despair of all the labor which I took under the sun. We'll now give our attention to Brother Brad Ricks, and his subject today is Seeking the Sun.
Morning. Wire myself up here. I tend to wander a little bit. All right. Those of you who have known me for a while or heard me speak for a while, Ecclesiastes has always interested me. First talk I ever gave years ago was on Ecclesiastes. It's a really unique book. I think that's kind of why I'm drawn to it. It's also a very challenging book in a lot of ways. You know, as you read through this, you find it even contradicting itself, contradicting other scriptures. So it's one of those books, kind of like Job, where you really have to read the whole book to kind of get the consistent message and truth. You know, you get through Job and you've read 30 some chapters, you get to the end, and God says that most of what you just read was not even truth. So in its context, it really requires some understanding, and I'm far from getting it at this point, but I'm personally kind of desiring to dive back into this book a little more to try to wrap my arms around it and understand it. So this is a work in progress, and what you see here on the screen, about the best visual representation I could easily find on a Google search to kind of reflect what this book portrays. You know, think back a couple weeks on how this flower felt, buried under maybe a foot of snow and seemingly having a hard time getting out and receiving that light, strength, and nourishment that it needs. Think about what Brother Rob just read us. We have a man who is truly in anguish, depression, over the sorrow that he is finding in life, which, from all that we can tell in reading this, is devoid of God and godly principles. Very much in this book, he's struggling to find purpose, struggling to find meaning to human life. And it's very much comes across as, to me, a scientific study, which kind of piques my interest as well. That's kind of the field I tend to work in and have studied in, and we'll look at that in just a minute. First, really important broad concept: what is an Ecclesiastes? Anybody? Okay, good. We're at ground one. What does the word look like? Familiar word? What's that? Ecclesia. Yeah. So an ecclesia, last I was up here, it kind of spoke on that concept. It's an assembly. It's those who are called to an assembly. The Ecclesiastes is the person. This is a Greek word. It's the person who does the assembling. So the Ecclesiastes is the assembler, that who brings the ecclesia together effectively. It's translated preacher in our Bible, where it says, I, the preacher, the son of David, was king in Jerusalem. The Greek there is Ecclesiastes. The Hebrew is Kohelet. Means the same thing. As we just read, the book definitely starts on a somber and a frustrating note in these first two chapters. The author, like I said, kind of comes across as a scientist as you go through this book. He asks a lot of questions. He makes a lot of observations. He offers a fair amount of advice. We don't get any advice really until about the fifth chapter, though, because he's building a case. He's, again, trying to find the meaning of life, trying to eventually get towards a God-centered focus to achieve meaning and purpose. Again, that's something that we're all looking for, and this is a book that I really think we can all relate to very well. As I mentioned, the scientific aspect of it, I opened Microsoft Excel and I made a graph to kind of graph the progression of this book in a sense. And again, this is entirely subjective, unscientific, what you're seeing on the screen here. This is just reading through the chapters 1 through 12 of Ecclesiastes and kind of looking at the spiritual perspective that kind of comes across in each chapter. If you're looking at spiritual growth, what does that look like? Probably something we all relate to, right? We have our ups, we have our downs. We might be trending up, we might be trending down, we might be on a flat line, but it's really not consistent. And that's something really interesting as you read this book. This is an individual who is truly wrestling with the observations and concepts of life that frustrate him. And he's trying to understand it, trying to find meaning to it. But as he does that, he's writing it down throughout the process. It's very much a process-oriented book, which, again, is just a very interesting thing to look at because it's very much how our brains work. I kind of tend to read this as Rob brought out a lot of it in what he just read. I thought thus and so during a certain time of his life. He writes about what he thinks and how he feels. And again, it's a very interesting approach for a book of the Bible, which is very unique. I don't think we really see it elsewhere. Most folks, just as a note, believe it's written by Solomon. I'll tend to agree with that, but I may just say the author because we're not specifically told. He was king out of Jerusalem. He's a son of David. Good chance when you consider a lot of what he did, and we'll look at some of that. Again, from what Brother Rob just read is pretty well described here. This is where the book starts. It starts at rock bottom. Kind of a common saying, what's the best thing about hitting rock bottom? Yeah, at least heard mumbles and some fingers pointing up. The only way to go is up. You know, you're there, so it kind of becomes somewhat of a positive, and this really is the foundation from which the rest of this work becomes built on. Something to think spiritually now. What does the Bible say about a rock? Solid foundation. It relates that rock to certain individuals, right? We have Jesus Christ himself is spoken of as a rock, a cornerstone. And the work of the apostles as a foundation, as Brother Josh said. God, you have about 100 references where God is spoken of as a rock. Again, spiritually something to think about because this is somewhere where a lot of us have been. It's the reason a lot of us come here is that we can find finally something firm. It's a hard place to be. Solomon was in a very hard place where what we've just read in the first two chapters, he concludes, I hated life. Doesn't tend to get much worse than that, but he's building up. Let's look over at Psalm 71. Again, some of us have been here. Some of us may end up here. But it's worth thinking about that rock, being able to shift our minds to the spiritual. Again, nothing of what Brother Rob read included reference to God. It was very much a self-focused perspective. He's gonna bring God into the context eventually. But Psalm 71, verse 1. In you, Lord, I have taken refuge. Let me never be put to shame. In your righteousness, rescue me and deliver me. Turn your ear to me and save me. Be my rock of refuge, to which I can always go. Give the command to save me, for you are my rock and my fortress. Deliver me, my God, from the hand of the wicked, from the grasp of those who are evil and cruel. So to recognize that rock, that strength and help that we need when we do find ourselves in a spiritual low, in a low position, to use that rock, to trust in that rock, to help to bring us back up is just somewhere where our minds need to be there. Something that frustrates Solomon is this. Back in chapter 1, Ecclesiastes 1, 3 through 5, again, he's just looking at the world around him, and as this kind of downward spiral is coming across in the first two chapters, I'll just reread that. First off, verse 2, vanity of vanities, all is vanity, says the preacher, Ecclesiastes. What profit has a man of all his labor that he takes under the sun? One generation passes away, another comes. But the earth abides forever. The sun arises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it arose. The wind blows toward the south and turns to the north. Verse 7, the rivers run to the sea and they're not full. It keeps happening. This is just, again, I'm by training a hydrogeologist, and this is just, it's called the water cycle, the hydrologic cycle. One example of many cycles in the created world. Life, water, carbon, nitrogen, the sun, the earth, everything is really a cycle, and it's continual. And if you don't see God's hand in that, he's in a very frustrated place where this is just bothering him. That there's no seeming end or beginning to these things. He's looking for a conclusion, some finality, and he's not getting it. And at his low point, this is really a frustrating, endless loop. Because, again, who's missing from the first two chapters of his observations? It's God. He's only focused very much on self and observing what's around him. And it's a difficult place to be. Because where is he looking for his information? It's a term, when you think Ecclesiastes, that you see over and over and over again. We read several occurrences of it here. That term, under the sun. I saw this under the sun, thus and so under the sun. Again, that's where he's looking. You kind of can picture that, the sun to his back, and he's just looking to the ground, to the earth, to his own feet. Just a few verses, we're not going to read through all those, but let's contrast the perspective. I will read 1:9, since I said let's contrast it. Chapter 1, verse 9, the thing that has been is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done, and there is no new thing under the sun. Again, it's that loop where there's nothing new, there's nothing changing. It's just the same, and he's frustrated. Let's go to 2 Peter 3 to look at the spiritual contrast to that. 2 Peter 3, verse 13. But according to his promise, we are looking for something new. That cycle is not eternal. We are looking for a new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. Ecclesiastes, in a lot of respects, is a very natural book. It's divinely inspired, yes, but this book is an analysis of human life. Human flesh with its strengths and its weaknesses applicable to all men in the world. It's a very broadly applicable book that, anyone without knowledge of the gospel hope can probably relate to in a lot of ways and hopefully also gain something from it. But it's from this bare human perspective that Ecclesiastes is able to find meaning. He's able to find purpose because he keeps asking questions and he keeps making new observations and new assessments because he's building a way out of that pit that we saw in the prior slide to find hope, to find meaning, and to find purpose, because he brings God into this and he looks for these answers. And certainly he ultimately does find them. Here's kind of a summary of the process of where his mind was in these first two chapters. On the left is chapter 1, verse 17. I gave my heart to know wisdom. He gave his heart, devoted himself to knowing the experience of men on this earth, those around him, to know wisdom, also to know madness, to know folly, to just not withhold anything from himself. As he says in chapter 2, 9, and 10, the next piece, I was great. Whatever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them. Fulfilled every self-desire that I could possibly want or imagine. And the conclusion of all that, therefore, I hated life. feeding on self and self-interest, looking for joy, pleasure, never lasted. He found a dead end. Why? His immediate concern in verse 15 and 16 of chapter 2, if you look at Ecclesiastes 2, is that after putting so much effort into accumulating possessions and experiences to himself, he's ultimately going to die. And he's going to be remembered no differently than what he calls a fool. His focus is 100% directed at himself. Self-gratification in this life, wanting self-glorification when his life ends, and realizing that he's not going to have that either. Now, if you look at chapter 2, just glance your eyes over the first 12 verses. Make it the first 18 verses. Ecclesiastes 2, just look at 1 through 18. What word do you see showing up again and again and again? Anybody? I. If you include me, my, and mine, 18 verses, 51 times do you see the author focused on himself. I, me, my, mine, 51 times in 18 verses. 3 times per verse on average. Focused on self. He devoted his life to gratifying himself in any means that he could. Specifically, he mentions knowledge, madness, folly, joy, pleasure, wine, houses, vineyards, orchards, gardens, pools, servants, women, children, livestock, silver and gold, entertainers. He had everything. And when he looked at all that he possessed and all the pleasures right before him, he says in verse 11, I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought and on the labor that I had labored to do, and behold, all was meaningless. All was vanity. All was pointless or meaningless. And vexation of spirit, the King James says. That really means grasping at wind. And there was no profit under the sun. What did he lack? He lacked meaning. It was all vanity. By continually feeding himself, he learned that that appetite of self-gratification can't be filled. There's no lasting pleasure from it. He only found ultimately emptiness. A lot of us have been there, right? We've reached that point. And that's probably why a lot of us are here today, because that foundation, that rock, gave us something to build on, to build a house where we know God's purpose is to dwell within us, where he and his son can be reflected in us. And that's what they want in us. Let's look over at Philippians chapter 2. This is again contrast. We see an individual serving self, focused on self-fulfillment, looking inward, and ultimately the sorrow that comes. Philippians 2, 2 through 5. Paul exhorts the Philippians, fulfill my joy in his desire for them to live the gospel that they now know, that you be like-minded, have the same love, being of one accord among yourselves, being of one mind. Let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, focusing on self. But in lowliness of mind, let each of you esteem others better than yourselves. Look not every man on his own things, but every man look on the things of others. And let this mind be in you, because most importantly, who did likewise? Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. And if you look over at 1 Peter 7, 1 Peter 1, 7 doesn't exist. 1 Peter 1, Peter brings out the fact his audience was in many cases suffering because of their faithfulness. But despite the challenges that they would face in life, it also brings joy. 1 Peter 1, 7 and 8, that the trial of your faith, they were tried, being much more precious than of gold that perishes, though it be tried with fire, might be found unto praise and honor and glory at the appearing of Jesus Christ, whom having not seen, you love, in whom though now you see him not, yet believing you rejoice, with joy unspeakable and full of glory. Solomon, or Ecclesiastes, saw everything, and he didn't withhold his mind, his heart, his body from anything. that was physical right there, and it didn't bring joy. Jesus Christ, whom having not seen, brethren, you love. Because believing, you rejoice with joy, a hope, something that gives us encouragement with a joy unspeakable and full of glory. And something we want to consider that is very helpful in relating. I find Ecclesiastes an extremely relatable book, hopefully with anyone around us, because this rock bottom concept where Ecclesiastes was is where so many people end up for whatever reason. And I'll throw this out because it's been on my mind. I've been very much clearly focused on this for a while now, and really thinking about this author and his book and what it means. And I got a phone call from someone yesterday. And someone I haven't talked to in years, crying because he was there. And again, I don't think it's coincidental that this is exactly kind of where my mind has been, is on situations where someone is in such a hard place, and just this kind of out of the blue phone call from somebody because he needed stability, and he doesn't have it. I kind of don't know where to go from that, except I guess this is kind of where it's going. At the same time, again, things are so relatable to this book. He expressed, he knows my faith, he knows my background, he's been there, and he doesn't want to have a part to do with religion either. So it's a hard place, and kind of with that disagreement, it's hard to find a place for him anyway. Certainly, keep your prayers on those in those situations, and on our own selves to try to find a way to be able to help them and guide them to find meaning, purpose, and stability. And think about this. Again, we got this door. It kind of looks like ours in the back of the room, right? And I thought about this. A lot of folks, when they leave here and go away, end up in a place like this. We've had a lot of people come in this building just in the past year, I know of, who have been in a very hard place, and it's brought them to want to come to seek God. This is part of our responsibility to look at ourselves. When someone is there, think about how difficult it is. And several of us have done this, thankfully. But how difficult it is to show up and open that door when you've been away for so long, and you have all these, kind of probably self-regret type feelings, but they come here. And that's a hard step to take, isn't it? To open that door. I remember, a brother who had been gone for years, and we had a birthday party for a family member at our house. He drove past our house twice before he parked his car down the street and walked there, because just to even see us was very hard. And when you're away, it can be a really challenging thing. But the message is, when someone does walk in this door, no matter who they are, we don't know where they are, we don't know where they've been, but they're here because they need something, and they're looking for something. And the responsibility is on every one of us to help them, to be a strength to them, to come to them and talk to them. Again, we can all think of people who have come here just within the past year, who have been in a tough spot. A couple that certainly come to mind that I know I talked to a fair amount. Tracy, Jeanette, here with her kids, and they're not here anymore. Varying reasons, but just to think, maybe if we were more attentive to them, more attentive to their needs, maybe they'd still be here. The thought is, we need to do that, and all of us. It's everyone's job. It's not any committee or anything. It's everyone's job to try to meet those people's needs and get to know them, talk to them, care for them, because that's really what they're looking for when we're in a low place. It's not even someone who we haven't seen. It could very well be in our own midst. And there's such a valuable need to talking to each other, knowing each other, and being here for each other to be a help. So at the end of Ecclesiastes 2, like we said, this author's reached such a low spot. He begins to look up. Look at chapter 2. This is about where we stopped reading, verse 24, Ecclesiastes 2:24. And he starts to ask the questions, a real important question. Chapter 2:24, there's nothing better, he concludes, than for a man to eat and drink and tell himself that his labor is good. This also I have seen, that, here's the first mention of God in the book, it is from the hand of God. And now he asks the question, who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him? Who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him? So again, that's kind of how this book works. The author makes a lot of observations, and then often he'll make a question. And then he starts to answer that question and say the next chapter or a little while later, who can eat and who can have enjoyment without God? And that's where chapter 3 takes us. And I know you're thinking to yourself, we're well into this, and you're only at chapter 3 of 12. We're pretty much going to stop at chapter 3, so don't worry. Hopefully a lot of us are familiar with this poem at the beginning of this third chapter. And it's a really powerful contrast to the first two, because it shows how the events of our lives are very poetically established by our Creator. Just glance at the framework of this poem, chapter 3, 1 through 8. You open up Ecclesiastes again. First line and the last line even. A time to be born and a time to die, a time of war and a time of peace. Just think about that in concept. There's the whole plan of salvation, from birth and death in the Garden of Eden to the wars that bring about the ultimate peace at the return of our Lord. When we recognize God's hand in everything, and that's very much what he does finally in this chapter, our perspective on life and the events around us really take a big shift. The basic point being made in these verses that God establishes time and that our mortal lives are subject to time, with both good and bad events being a part of it. Again, he's just making observations of the world now with God having involvement. But seeing that perspective really helps to bring some hope to the situation. And this is a gradual improvement. He's taking a step basically out of that hole to recognize that God is the one who's involved. It's not me who's in control. It's God who is. And an interesting observation he makes, if you look at chapter 3, verse 11, it's right here. God has made everything beautiful in its time. Again, this is very much about time. He's also set, this is a key thing, he has set eternity in the human heart. That word means a time out of mind. It's something really beyond our immediate mortal situation. God has set something bigger than ourselves in our hearts. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. Really key observation. Why was Solomon so distraught in the first two chapters? Mankind is predisposed to seek something bigger than ourselves. No matter how hard we try to find greater joy, to find something better on our own, Solomon found that he couldn't do it because it wasn't from God. He didn't recognize God's involvement. It's a valuable observation here, too, when it comes to our involvement with the gospel. Our responsibility to share that hope that we have with others, because the fact is, again, this is just a natural observation, is that mankind is looking for something else, something bigger. It's really a natural part of us, and that can hopefully give us hope, some encouragement when we speak of our hope with others, to recognize that in one way or another, they're looking for something too. And maybe, hopefully, what we're able to share can resonate, can give them, maybe relate to what they're looking for, because just think of our own selves and those around us. People are looking for purpose, and that's a valuable thing to realize. Over here in 1 Corinthians 2, we look over there. This very much agrees with what we just read in Ecclesiastes 3:11, but it builds on it. Paul quotes from Isaiah in this verse, Ecclesiastes 2:9. He says, "As it is written, things which eye has not seen and ear has not heard, and which has not entered into the heart of man, all that God has prepared for those who love him." That's quoting Isaiah 64:4 in the context of recognizing that men really aren't seeking after the things of God. But 1 Corinthians 2:10, he relates it now to this ecclesia. Likewise, it relates to us. but God has revealed these things unto us through his Spirit. For the Spirit searches all things, even the deep things of God. So all these things that men aren't able to find out have been revealed to us. And again, we have a responsibility with that to share it, to give others the guidance on that way, as such an individual like Ecclesiastes so badly needed. The next couple verses down from there, I know that whatsoever God does, it shall be forever. Nothing can be put to it. Nothing can be taken from it. And God does it that men should fear before him. Again, remember in the first two chapters, who was controlling his life? 100% him. He had about as tight a grip on those reins of control that he could have, and it didn't go well. But we all relate to that. We're all very much trying to control things in our own lives, aren't we? But when you take this to heart, hopefully you can kind of feel your blood pressure drop a little. It's God who's in control. Nothing can be put to it. We can't add or take away from what God has done, and what he has done that's the way it's going to be. So that men, we all hopefully are familiar with the conclusion of Ecclesiastes, that men would fear before God, as he's just for the first time recognizes here in chapter 3. So kind of takes us for the first 3 chapters. At this point, from chapter 3, again, remember that second slide, it's kind of an up and down, still trending up. We don't have the time to consider a lot of detail, but I encourage you guys on your own to read through here and again, relate to it, think about it, and see that progression and appreciate the way that the author works to again, find purpose in our lives. We're just going to look at a few verses in the next few chapters, really just kind of taken out of context, but just a few words of encouragement and exhortation to us. In chapter 5 is the first time he starts to give advice. And he actually advises directly really on the concept of worship and how to get out of that hole that he was in to grow spiritually. As you see here, keep your foot when you go to the house of God and draw near to listen, rather than give the sacrifice of fools, for they don't know that they do evil. So how do we do this? How do we, again, grow spiritually? His concept is right here. Just a few words to maybe summarize this verse. Respect God, number 1. Listen. And as he kind of shows there in the latter half, remain humble. Respect God. Listen. Remain humble. James chapter 1 tells us this. Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear. Listen. Be swift to hear. Be slow to speak, showing that humility. Be slow to wrath. For the wrath of man does not work the righteousness of God. And look at the second half of this verse too. The whole Bible is full of religious worship that turns south. For they don't know that they do evil. Again, this is something that we have to be careful of. Because in the house of God, Solomon's saying there's going to be a group there too who are unaware that they've lost sight of godly respect. They've lost sight of humility. They're maybe no longer listening to the word of God. They're worshiping probably on their terms, because that's the way worship often turns south in the Bible. They start doing it on their terms. And that plagues religious worship throughout the Bible. It can just as well plague us. So something to be cautious of, and to keep this godly respect and listening to his word at the forefront of our hearts and minds. Moving on, just a verse here in chapter 6. Enjoy what you have rather than desiring what you don't have. Another translation says it's better to look at what is in front of you than to go looking for what you want. We all have some real valuable responsibilities. The ecclesia, our families, shining the light in our community. There's so much need and value literally right in our lap, right in front of us. As he says, just dreaming about nice things is meaningless. It's like chasing the wind. How's that going to work out for you? You going to catch it? No, we can't, and we won't. But if God has given us something, if he's given us a responsibility, cling to it, work with it, care for it. Hebrews 13:5. Let's look at that. Hebrews 13:5. Let your character be free from covetousness, and be satisfied with the things that are present. For he has said, I will not leave you, neither will I forsake you. In other words, God has committed himself to us. Likewise, we should commit ourselves to whatever it is he has given us. I like this one. You know, I catch my own self at the ripe old age of 38, you know. Back in my day, you know, and back when things were good and easy. That doesn't exist. Again, remember the first chapter. Again, observations. There's nothing new under the sun. Don't say, why were the former days better than these? You don't inquire wisely about this. Paul says the same thing to the Philippians. It's like Philippians 3. Philippians 3, verse 13. Philippians 3, 13 to 15. Brethren, I count not myself to have apprehended, rather in context to have apprehended perfection, but this one thing I do, forgetting those things that are behind and reaching forth to those things which are before, I press toward the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. Let us, therefore, as many as be perfect, be thus minded. The call of the gospel is something to be active with, to move it forward, to be doing and working here and now. Paul and Solomon both caution against longing for the past, because what's going to happen if our mind's focused on the past? Probably going to burden us down. It makes it very hard to work in the present and towards the future. There's a hymn. It's based on Ecclesiastes. We're probably all familiar with it. It says this: life is the time to serve the Lord, to do his will, to learn his word. Ecclesiastes illustrates that very much in this book. The only certain time we have, he talks about this a lot in the later chapters, the only time that we know we have is right now. Jesus speaks of the same thing. Don't worry about the future. You have enough to worry about right now. And as long as our focus is there, we'll accomplish something. If a man is lazy, the rafters sag. If his hands are idle, the house leaks. What house are we concerned with? At the spiritual house. And we've talked about the need to attend to one another, to attend to the word of God, to hear, to focus, to care, and be doing. If we do that, this house will be a place where he and his son want to dwell. If we don't attend to these things, that's when that house eventually comes crumbling down. This is chapter 11, verse 4. A very different translation. Most translations read about like this: whoever watches the wind will not plant. Whoever looks at the clouds will not reap. Effectively what that means, if you wait for perfect conditions, you'll never get anything done. Who here, again, this is a relatable book, who has come up with a great idea of something of potentially really good benefit and never followed through because we felt the time wasn't right, we feared something? Anybody? It? Anybody? Okay, I at least have a few in my company. I feel like it's every day for me. Come up with something, yeah, that'd be a real good idea. It doesn't happen because I have an excuse. I think we can all relate to that. If you're concerned about the clouds and the wind, you're not going to plant. If you don't plant, you're not going to sow. It takes effort. Again, I think it's terrific for the folks here that have put so much into this RVA Light project lately. Again, that's one of those things. This is a big effort. And that's terrific because kind of putting the potential wind and clouds aside, realizing the need and doing something. And that's a wonderful model and example to follow. This author, Ecclesiastes, he did a lot in his life, didn't he? And it didn't bring much good until he recognized the great benefits that can come when that work is related to God. Again, we can do a lot of work that benefits ourselves, but what's that going to bring in the long run? Not much. It's going to be pretty short-lived. Focusing on the things of God, that's terrific. So the conclusion of this book, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole of man. There's something that completes us, that gives us purpose and guidance in this life to bring value to all that we do. I know that's the conclusion, but it's not the last slide. I'm going to back up because we're getting ready for the memorial service. Chapter 11, verse 7. Chapter 7, verse 11 also says very much the same thing. Truly the light is sweet, and it's a pleasant thing for the eyes to behold the sun. Remember the language at the beginning. All is vanity. All is pointless. All is meaningless. I hated life. Then through a series of personal thoughts, observations, reflection and meditation, asking more questions, and learning, Ecclesiastes became able to view the source of that. Remember, under the sun, everything was trouble and vanity and meaningless under the sun. He was able to look at something here that he calls pleasant and sweet, beholding the sun, taking that in to who we are. We're no different. When we can stop looking down at our own pursuits under the sun and turn towards our Creator, towards his Son, we are blessed with the ability to also take in something sweet, something pleasant, something of benefit, meaning, and purpose in light, true light of God. John 6. Look at two last references to close. Turn these up with me, please. John 6, verse 40. And this is the will of him that sent me, that everyone which sees the Son and believes on him may have everlasting life, and I will raise him up at that last day. Just to underscore the value of seeing the Son, recognizing the Son, and taking him into who we are. In Malachi chapter 4. Pretty much a similar message. But for you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in its rays, and you will go forth and skip about like calves from the stall.